Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. In partnership with the Daily Beast, we are in the company of Aaron Zaleski, the Paris correspondent. Also want to welcome back Vivian Walt of Time Magazine, Mark Dean of Bloomberg News, and France24.com's Sylvain Attal, France24.com, but also in partnership with the French edition of the website Mashable. For another week, possibly for another 4 or 8 years, New York's Trump Tower will definitely be the place to be seen. Case in point, French far-right leader, presidential hopeful Marine Le Pen on a private visit to New York. This picture taken Thursday. She's sitting with her partner, who's a member of the European Parliament, Louis Alliot, former National Front member, Pierre Sirac, who used to be the representative in France for the Moonies, and Donald Trump's downstairs neighbor, George Guido Lombardi, who belongs to Italy's far-right Northern League, and who says he likes to play middleman to his upstairs neighbor.
This is a perfectly private encounter that she had with some friends of ours. Some of them are entrepreneurs, businessmen, industrialists, and she just happened to be here because I happen to live here. And we didn't want to have a party for her in some restaurant or some open places, so we did a very private event. As I said, we had a whole bunch of friends, and it just happened to be at Trump Tower.
Sylvain Attal, it just happened to be at Trump Tower.
Yeah. You know, actually, she's actually the French Donald Trump, of course. She's even more moderate than Donald Trump. On Muslims, for example, she never says that she wants to forbid Muslims to come to France. She's on various issues. She's more moderate than Trump.
And she is, but not necessarily her party.
Not necessarily our party. Of course, there's several wings in the party. It's not the question.
But when you hear Mr. Lombardi saying that the meeting just happened to be at Trump Tower.
It's not the first time that she's doing that. She tried to get invited in Israel, for example, because she claims that she's a great fan of Israel, and the Israelis are very uncomfortable with that because of his father, of course, and all his declaration and anti-Semitic declaration, but her record on Israel is very clean, and she tried to be invited in Israel a few years ago, and she almost succeeded. At the last time, she was rebuked, but it's not the first time that she tried to put the foot on the door.
Vivian Walt, what was Marine Le Pen doing at Trump Tower?
Well, go figure. We had one of his neighbors, her friend, and apparently drinking coffee out of paper cups. It's not exactly an elegant photograph. It makes her look somewhat desperate, almost. She's made it quite clear that Trump's her man. She congratulated him on Twitter before it was even announced on TV that he had won the election.
And she supported him during all the campaign.
Absolutely.
She's
one of her
supporter.
principal aides was in Trump Tower with Trump the night of the election, celebrating. So, there's no doubt about that. And clearly, she draws a very distinct link. She connects the dots between Trump's victory and her own prospects. It was this totally improbable candidate who got elected president. And, it could happen to her, I think, is the logical extension of that.
Mark Dean, the timing of this, we're under 4 months from the first round of the French presidential election.
Well, I think, this was clearly a political mistake for Marine Le Pen because, as Vivian said, it makes her look desperate. It won't register with the average voter. We can sit here and discuss about it, and it does look desperate, but it goes over the heads of most people. What's also interesting is whether someone professional in, the State Department or even just an advisor around Trump said, don't meet with her because it looks bad. You're going to have to meet with whoever is French president in any case, and there's no upside to this for you.
No upside to that, but he did meet with Nigel Farage.
Well, but that was perhaps at a different time in a different place when before the professional handling of a president-elect got underway.
Just one word you mentioned the political chaos. Maybe we can just say that it's another proof of the political chaos, because we know that she's pretty close to Stephen Bannon, for example. So it's possible that Stephen Bannon said, well, if you come to the Trump Tower, there's a chance that you can meet him, but then it's scrambled, and it's possible.
Oh, I think it was a snub. The Daily Beast just wrote an article about this,
Yeah,
where the
very
reporter
good article.
interviewed Lombardi about this, and Bannon was aware that she was coming.
Bannon, who's going to be his press secretary.
Exactly, and
Sorry,
I think
No, his advisor.
advisor,
Senior advisor,
senior
yeah.
advisor,
Political advisor.
political advisor, and he was aware she was coming. As Vivian had said, she's been Le Pen has been an admirer of Trump from the outset. I think she came there with the intention to meet Trump, and it didn't happen. And the question is why it didn't happen. There's speculation that maybe Trump in the U.S. say the word Le Pen for people who are aware of that party, and there's still an association with racism, with anti-Semitism. Maybe Trump wanted to distance himself from that. There's another theory that Nigel Farage doesn't particularly like Marine Le Pen.
No, he doesn't like her.
He has back in 2014.
Yeah, he refused to be part of his group.
Yeah, she invited him to join a coalition, to anti-EU coalition, and he outright refused. So Farage has already cozied up to Trump. Was this a move by Trump to placate Farage? We don't really know why the snub.
I mean, it certainly seems that there's something in here about the competitiveness between, Farage and Le Pen and other associates, as to who is going to emerge as the major person in Europe for the right wing.
And there's another thing that maybe it can be pure caution from Donald Trump. He knows that there's a political election in France. It's complicated for him to meet one candidate and not all the other one. Note, for example, that Angela Merkel refused to have an interview with Emmanuel Macron in Berlin, for example, just because of the context. It's something that you cannot do during this kind of period. It's as simple as that.
The reason he gave was that Trump is not meeting with any foreign leaders right now, but that's absolutely not true.
Well, he met some foreign leaders.
Yeah, he has met foreign leaders, so that's an excuse that
But
doesn't
in this case,
up.
there's an election in France, so it's complicated for him to giving the impression that he's supporting
He's met with
one
businessmen. In fact, he even talked about meeting. He called him Christophe Arnaud, but it's Bernard Arnaud, the luxury goods magnate, in the press conference. So he can meet with business leaders, but he can't meet with politicians. I don't know.
Oh, I completely see the point that Sylvain makes. I mean, in any case, a normal president shouldn't be meddling in the politics of an ally, and that is, shouldn't be done. I don't think Trump cares about that, but maybe someone else in the U.S. government or around Trump does.
Quick question about French politics. There are these primaries of the left taking place, Mark Dean. I don't know what it was like in your newsroom today, but here, where we got plenty of politics junkies walking around near the water cooler, there wasn't much talk about them.
Nobody thinks that any of those people are going to be president next May. So I think the interest is minimal. It's consecrated to absolute diehard lefties and perhaps card-carrying socialists. It'll be very interesting to see what the turnout it is in that primary.
The figures of the audience on TF1 was very poor, but it was the first round. Let's see. There's 2 more debates coming. I don't know. I think that people, there's something like, between Emmanuel Macron and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a lot of people are telling themselves, well, it's pretty much covering all the left. Do we need another socialist candidate? There's doubt about that.
France's eyes turned towards Africa this Friday. In Mali's capital, a gathering that was used to be called the Franco-African Summit, which, to move with the times, now known as the Africa-France Summit. One former colony in particular, Senegal, with an eye to the other big diplomatic do taking place in the tiny country that Senegal surrounds, Gambia, where Nigeria's president was once again leading a delegation to convince that country's strongman of 22 years to go quietly ahead of a January 19th deadline for leaving. Former coup leader Yahya Jammeh has a different take on his shock December 1st presidential election loss.
Our review and investigations have revealed an unprecedented level of foreign interference in our elections and internal affairs, and also a sustained smear campaign, propaganda, and misinformation. Even though there is no single fatality or mortality, we have seen the UN Security Council, the African Union, and ECOWAS take unprecedented and hasty resolutions against our republic.
unprecedented and hasty. Thousands have fled now the Gambia, fearing that there could be trouble ahead. It's interesting when you look at the images, Vivian Walt, there of for the second time, President Buhari, himself a former military man, going in to try to gently twist Yahya Jammeh's arm.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if it actually works. But, you know, of course, the regional power, the biggest economy in Africa now, trying to persuade the leader of this absolutely minuscule country to move aside. There's something sort of poignant about it, even. I mean, what's so telling about what he said on TV is that there was no recognition that people might actually want to move on, that this was all about foreign manipulation. And it just kind of seemed to expose him as being so terribly out of touch with where, you know, new generation of Gambians, of Africans really are at this point.
I think out of touch and determined to hold on to power at any cost. I mean, this was the same man who a while back said he had a billion-year mandate. I don't think he really thought that he would leave or be voted out.
Yeah, losing touch, an issue. And also on that point, it sounds, I mean, at the summit taking place in Bamako, people, well, at the same time, not very forceful because they're also paying attention to what's going on in Francophone Africa in places like DR Congo.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, they're all kind of looking out for their own survival in a way. And, you know, it really is survival at this point. I mean, it almost seems to me, sitting from this perspective, that it's at kind of a turning point. People have had enough of this particular kind of like endless government, 22 years in power, and he wants another mandate. People have had enough. They've had enough in Zimbabwe. They've had enough in Congo. You know, the list is long.
The interesting thing is, if you listen to what he said, there's a basic political stratagem in there which turns up in Europe. Outsiders interfering with us, you know, it's the European Union, it's our neighbors, whatever. It's turned up in the U.S. with the U.S. election. So, you know, these things are a little bit universal, but ultimately we share this planet. And, you know, I think that voters have to realize that just brushing off what is being said by your neighbors is probably not a good idea.
Interfering in African elections is an old game. And what I've noticed is that at the summit in Bamako, there's a few NGOs that fiercely criticize François Hollande for privileging the security aspects and not the democracy and the fight against corruption, etc. That's interesting.
Domestic interfering is what you're saying.
Yeah, domestic interference.
Rigging.
Yeah, rigging.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. It's like if ever there was a time where what happens in Africa really affects Europe, it's now. I mean, we've had this absolute major migrant crisis. And so, in a sense, I mean, what Mark says is absolutely correct. It's not like we're living on two separate planets.
It is everyone else's business, in other words.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's better for the African Union to be handling the crisis than the Europeans.
All right. Finally, how many in the streets of Tehran Tuesday for the funeral of one of the pillars of the Iranian Revolution? Some are claiming as many as 2.5 million. It took 2 hours for the procession to make its way. A final farewell to former President Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the biggest funeral procession Iran's capital has seen since the death of Ayatollah Khomeini. All of the big leaders of the country were out there. In his later years, Rafsanjani was only partially sidelined. He was still a major player, and to many, the main guarantor of reformists among the clerics. There were even pockets of marchers, and you could see them in these social media images, chanting slogans, Free Mousavi, Free Korabi, slogans from the 2009 Green Movement. Mousavi and Korabi must be released is what they're chanting. A nod to those reformist candidates from 2009 who are still under house arrests. Sylvain Attal, your reaction to...
I can only say what our correspondent in Tehran, Myriam Pirzadeh, told us, that first, the name of Mousavi is just forbidden to be scanned in public. So it was a kind of revival here of the green protest, undoubtedly. And then the other fact is that Rafsanjani was revered despite the fact that he was close from the reformists, just because he was very close from former Ayatollah Khomeini. That was the only reason why he was a companion of Ayatollah Khomeini. That's the reason that everyone revering him in Iran and in Tehran. And it leaves the liberal, the reformist orphan, that they have the sense that they're left alone. And that's the reason why all these people, among them a lot of young people, they're worried that they're not going to have protectors any longer.
Two schools of thought on that, because some are saying, well, like you were just saying, that times have moved on,
Exactly.
and that they shouldn't have to be looking to an 82-year-old man anyway. That the times have moved on in Iran.
Absolutely. And you have the younger generation of reformers, many of whom are in jail or have left the country or whatever. But, you know, when you go to Iran, what's so striking is that there's this huge new generation. It's a very young country, which is educated, well-read.
Look at these smartphones. Look at the
Absolutely. Look at that. Look at that image. And yet very much kind of stifled in being able to have real individual participation. And sooner or later, that kind of contradiction has just got to kind of fall apart.
How the Iran deal holds up over the coming years is
It's a huge question.
A huge question.
But it's interesting looking at the testimony of both Tillerson and Mattis coming in this week. It's sort of a dose of really realpolitik saying, you know, we may not like it, but let's not just throw it out completely, despite whatever is being said in the U.S. politically, because it's very, you know, these things are very complicated.
I think there's also fears that his death could create a power vacuum. He was seen as this moderate, pragmatic centrist who sort of kept the hardliners in check. And the question is, now that he's gone, who is going to take up that role?
And there's no one, apparently, with the same kind of credential.
Among the clerics. Nobody, but again, there's a younger generation coming in. Sivatat, when you look at what a heavy lift that Iran deal was, can it be unwound?
No, I agree with Mark said. I think it cannot be unwound. I think that there was, I cannot say more than he said, that it's impossible. As long as it works, and it works, it's complicated to just, you know, rip it up. Despite all the criticism that you can have, because this kind of deal is never perfect, so you can say what do you want on it, but it's and actually Rouhani is criticized in Iran because the Iranians believe that, for example, it didn't bring all the economic benefits that they were longing with this deal. So there's criticism on both parts. So it shows when something is criticized on both parts, maybe it's good.
It's probably it. I mean, the point to make is that, you know, the geopolitics is in flux. The U.S. relationship with Russia is essentially working as sort of a wary ally with Iran, and you know, the U.S. relationship with Israel and Saudi Arabia, with the arrival of Trump, you know, questions are being put there. So I think that you know, Iran deal or no Iran, difficult to undo the Iran deal, but what happens, you know, the place that Iran finds in the new geopolitical environment is going to be interesting.
Place where it finds in the new geopolitical environment, there might be the argument as well that Iranians will like this more, how should I say it, entrenched leaders now, because that's the trend not just in the United States. Leaders are nationalists in a lot of places: Japan, China, Russia. The Iranians might have an easier time in reading of it.
I don't know. I mean, I think the Iranian population is more sophisticated and is generally given credit for. They happen to have a very authoritarian and tough government, and you know, it's always difficult to separate people from their governments. But you know, will the Iranians appreciate Trump more or less? I don't know, and I don't know that really matters.
I mean, I think that Mark makes a very good point. I mean, there's always been a kind of unspoken social contract here. You have an authoritarian leader. You're not going to have individual rights, but you're going to be able to make a living, etc., etc. If the Iran deal refuses to bring the kind of economic benefits that the Iranians were hoping for, and at the moment it's not, then you're really in trouble. Then you don't have that side of the contract. And you have a generation of millions of people who are simply economically frustrated and therefore politically frustrated.
All right, we're going to leave it there for now. I want to thank Vivian Walt, Sylvain Attal, Mark Dean, Aaron Zaleski, but stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
No fake news, please.
As if I would. Yes, lots of people still talking about what was said during that press conference, the first time we've heard from the president-elect since he won the election. But obviously, one of the things that everyone is talking about in particular is this so-called dirty dossier, as lots of people now seem to be referring to it. Matt Werker in Politico has come up with this cartoon to show how Donald Trump is really having his cake and eating it on the issue of espionage. It's just awful anyone would leak unverified dossiers on my ties to Russia. Those leakers should be ashamed. And almost in the same breath, the things in those unverified emails stolen by WikiLeaks are awful. Hillary and the Democrats should be ashamed. And that really is at the heart of what a lot of people don't quite understand with Donald Trump, the amount of conflicting information that seems to come from his mouth. Now, this morning, he's been tweeting on that issue again. It now turns out, he says, that the phony allegations against me were put together by my political opponents and a failed spy afraid of being sued. He's referring in particular to reports that Jeb Bush, a super PAC that was working for him, may have actually ordered this report to be done. But the failing spy that he refers to has been unmasked by the Wall Street Journal as Christopher Steele, former MI6 officer, Russian specialist. And it could be him who really carries the can in terms of the most serious consequences to all this. According to the Wall Street Journal, they say that this report was prepared under contract to both Republican and Democratic adversaries of Mr. Trump. They say that Christopher Steele had declined interviews in recent weeks, saying that the topic of Russian hacking was just too hot for him to touch. His business partner, though, not in direct relation to the case, it has to be said, has said that they have no political axe to grind. So he has made very clear that their company isn't allied to any particular side. Interestingly, though, if we look at the Farnham Herald, which is the local newspaper of Christopher Steele, they report that he and his family have gone into hiding because, of course, there could be a lot of people very, very angry with this man. The neighbour, Mike Hopper, is quoted as saying, he asked me to look after his cat. I'm not sure where he's gone or how to contact him. We're all pretty secretive round here, to be honest. The Guardian has done a lot of digging on this one. They say that, according to them, intelligence sources vouch for the author's credibility, calling him a highly regarded professional. And one of the things that they ask is, why did America's intelligence agencies feel it necessary to provide a document about these claims to both the president and the president-elect? And they say the answer is very simple. It is the credibility of the man who gathered the information and the quality of his sources. Also in The Guardian, they've spoken to Sir Andrew Wood, former British ambassador to Moscow, who says the report might be true, it might be untrue, and frankly none of us at this point in time know. But what he does say is that the author is credible. One last point on this issue that is an interesting one, raised by a Huffington Post journalist, Jessica Schulberg. She says it's surprising that the media's decision to out Christopher Steele hasn't been scrutinised in the same way that BuzzFeed's decision to publish that whole dossier has been.
A week ago at this time, and kudos, by the way, for mentioning the Farnham Herald. They don't often get mentioned on our show.
It is a rarity.
A week ago at this time, you were telling us about the Housewives of ISIS. Now it's another television show that's making noise, and this one nobody's seen.
No, absolutely. It's another British programme, interestingly enough, another British comedy show, Urban Myths, and it has been pulled before broadcast. The series is due to start on the 19th of January, and one of the episodes is based on the stories, supposedly true, of a road trip taken by Liz Taylor, Michael Jackson and Marlon Brando. So far, so ridiculous. Now, the problem is this. Joseph Fiennes is portraying Michael Jackson, of course, a white actor, probably best known for his role in Shakespeare in Love. And a lot of people are very upset that he was chosen. And there has been a backlash going on for over a year now when he was first cast. But earlier this week, a trailer was released and it really reignited the whole row. In what world are they living? Michael never looked like that. If they need a reminder, they've provided a photograph of Michael Jackson looking considerably younger and darker skinned, it has to be said there. This is peak whitewashing, says Tammy Taylor. And looking at other reactions as well, the one that really caused the most concern for Sky Arts, which is the broadcast that was due to show it, came from Paris Jackson, Michael Jackson's daughter. I am so incredibly offended by it, as I'm sure plenty of people are as well, and it honestly makes me want to vomit. Now, the show has been pulled, just that one episode of it, but it is interesting that after a year of controversy, they've chosen to do it just a week before it's shown. For maximum publicity, you might think.
Maximum publicity. All right. Well, Emma James, the worst thing than being talked about. Many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.